following is an interview with Mr. Earl Ailor, Ailor, conducted at his office, 606 Main Street, Knoxville, Tennessee. Interview conducted by Dr. Charles Johnson, Director of the Center for the Study of War and Society. Interview May 18th, 1993. Normally what I do is just start out by asking kind of when you joined the service and why you joined and where you're from. You're from Knoxville area originally?
Yes. I was ordered to Fort Bragg and reported in on the 6th day of August, 1941.
Oh, before the war? Before we got involved in the war.
To the 47th Infantry of the 9th Infantry Division.
Okay. You were drafted, or you came through the Guard?
No. Or? In the spring of 1941, our professor of military science suggested to the senior military class in ROTC that we apply for our year's active duty, with the idea that we could get our year's active duty over with, be back about our civilian occupation, and on with it.
You were a student at UT then?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was in the senior class of the ROTC. Our entire senior class applied for our year's active duty. And we had barely graduated and gotten our commission as new second lieutenants before we had orders to report for duty.
Was your training in the ROTC here in engineers or infantry?
Infantry.
And so you got your orders to report in August of 41?
Well, so I reported on August the 6th, 1941.
What was your impression of Fort Bragg when you got there?
Well, it was a great big place. and of course, immediately we were involved in training. I was a platoon leader of B Company of the 47th Infantry, and we immediately were in training as soon as I got there, and stayed in training. We were on the Carolina maneuvers in the fall of 1941, and then I was sent in January to Fort Benning for a concentrated course in rifle and heavy weapons for the infantry regiment.
Okay. What was your impression of the quality and of the enlisted men that you were dealing with there in your first command?
Well, it was initially a shock because the enlisted men in the platoon that I had were from New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And it took several weeks before we could really communicate. They were mostly, I'd say, the majority of the ones were Italian, and many of them spoke with a very noticeable accent. And I spoke with a southern drawl, and it took us a while to be able to really communicate.
They were city kids mostly?
Mostly, yes.
But you got, within a few weeks...
Yes, we got so that we could understand each other.
What did they think about being there? Do you have any idea?
Well, some of them weren't too happy about it. Most of them were reconciled to the fact that we were building up our military strength, and that it might be that we would have to use it.
How did you feel? Did you think it was quite certain that we were going to be involved in a war, or was it still...
Well, in the back of my mind, I think I realized that the chances of our being involved in war were much better than 50-50 because of the developments of the German occupation of the area that they'd moved into, and the threat that was obvious from what they had done.
So you went off for heavy weapons training. What kind of training was that? What were you doing then?
We were given special training in the latest rifle that the United States Army had, and the latest in the machine gun, in their use and the need for us to understand how they operated, as well as how they could be taken apart and maintained.
So these were M1s, 30 caliber, 50 caliber machine guns?
Right.
Okay, anything bigger than that? Anti-tank weapons? Or?
Well, yes, we had some instruction in anti-tank artillery.
37 millimeter or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was September, October?
No.
Or this was...
That began the first, my recollection is it was about the 1st of February.
Oh, it was after we got into the war?
Yes.
Yeah.
1942.
Do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Oh, well do I remember. It was on Sunday afternoon. I was in the bachelor officers' quarters. I don't remember what I was doing. I was either listening to the radio or I was writing a letter home to my parents. And I heard down the hall someone who was excited. I couldn't understand what he said. So I went and opened the door and I said, "What was that you said?" I'll always remember. He said, "The Japs just bombed Pearl Harbor."
I think everybody who was alive then and was aware understood that things were going to be different from now on.
Right. Within a matter of a few hours, our division was alerted. Our motorized equipment was put on the train, and we were told that we were probably going to Trinidad. Why, I never knew.
Trinidad?
Yes. Shortly thereafter, we were taken off of alert and were started in amphibious landing training.
Oh,
And
where did you do that training? On the North Carolina coast? Or?
no, some of it on one of the lakes there on the Fort Bragg Reservation.
Oh,
And then later on the coast down at Paris Island, and then on the Chesapeake Bay.
What were those landings like? What sort of landing craft or what kind of boats did you?
Of course, they were not anything like what we later had in the big landing craft, but they gave us some feel for what a landing on a hostile shore might be like.
Okay.
I remember at least twice we went to the Chesapeake Bay and had landing operations on the Chesapeake Bay. And I remember so well the mosquitoes were about as big as...
big as your thumb.
Yes. And they weren't very pleasant company.
These landing craft, were they motorized?
Oh yes,
yeah.
yes.
But they weren't the ones with the drop down
Not,
bows.
Not until later, no.
Yeah. Right. So you went through that training, and then you went to the other weapons training.
No. This was after I had gotten back from the heavy weapons training.
Okay. So this would have been the summer of '42.
Summer of '42. And I remember we had a wise regimental commander. He'd been in World War I, and he didn't talk much. But when he did, you better listen. And I remember one July 1942, at the officers' meeting, he was always the last one to speak. We had weekly officers' meetings where we discussed what training we had had and what to anticipate and so forth. And I remember he got up after everyone else had been hurt, and he said, "Well, I guess everybody's afraid the war is going to be over before you get your moment of glory." He said, "Just take it from me, before it's all over, you'll get your bellies full of it."
Talking like somebody who'd been there.
And we remembered that later.
Did you have the feeling at the time that that he was right, that you were?
Well, we knew he was right, because we had learned to respect him.
What was his name?
Edwin Randall,
Randall.
later Brigadier General. Died, let's see, he died just a little over a year ago, I guess. And I visited him after the war was over in Clearwater, Clearwater, Florida.
So when did you get orders for departure from the States? Was that in the fall of '42?
We got orders in, I guess, about the 1st of October of 1942.
And you thought, well, this is it.
We knew it was it.
Did you know where you were going?
No. We had general ideas when we were moved out into it, what they referred to as Tent City, out of the barracks. So we'd get rid of all of our surplus equipment and clothing and so forth. We were issued respirators for breathing. And I immediately concluded that we were going to a desert area somewhere, without any specific indication. But I remember also one morning, Colonel Randall, he didn't really talk until after he'd had his breakfast and after he started smoking his cigar or his pipe. And on this particular morning, of course, everybody was speculating where we were going. And he said, "Well, I'm sure everybody's wondering where we're going. But it won't make a whole lot of difference. Even if we go to Armenia, after we've been there 3 or 4 months, the women will start looking whiter and whiter." And he was right.
Again, spoken like somebody who knew he was talking about.
And so it wasn't until after we were on the ship and outside of land that they unveiled a bold relief map of the location where we were going to land. At that time, of course, we were not in a position to communicate with anybody where we were going, and we studied that, and every individual in the landing party knew about where he was going to hit the land. And that was, we landed on November the 8th, but between the time we left sight of land until we got there, that map was reviewed by everyone that was going to be in the landing, so that everyone knew what his assignment was going to be and where he was supposed to go.
Did you anticipate heavy resistance from the French, or?
No, actually, that was a big question mark as to what we might anticipate.
Where did you go ashore?
At Safi, French Morocco, the southernmost landing.
Right. What, you went ashore early in the morning?
Under the cover of darkness.
Okay.
In
Before
fact,
dawn, then?
Yes, yes. We had 2 destroyers with the main landing party initial landing party. Company K and Company L were to go into the harbor and get as close as they could, and the troops would go in from there.
Okay. What company were you in?
I was in, well, at that time, I was in the headquarters company.
Headquarters?
Yes. I had been previously in the B company, but I had been, when I got promoted, I was asked if I would be the executive officer of headquarters company. And so I was in the headquarters company at that time. But I remember, as we were approaching, the destroyers entered the harbor, and up on the control tower, they flashed out, "Who are you?" in the Morse code. Mm-hmm. Well, we didn't respond. None of our forces responded. They flashed it out about the third time. And I'm not sure, and nobody is sure, who started shooting first, whether they did or we did. But I remember the battleship New York dropped a salvo on the control tower and made a direct hit. And the admiral that was in, the one in charge, was killed with this salvo from our heavy gun. And it was only a relatively short time after the landing that everything was really secured. I've forgotten specifically, but I think we lost 8 men in the assault.
From the regiment?
No, yes, from our regiment.
So the resistance was not particularly spirited?
No, the French started a column from Marrakech, I believe it was, from the French Foreign Legion, but they didn't get there until after it was all over.
They'll fight anybody.
Yes, yes.
And so you were, let's see, 9th, was that under, whose command was that under?
General Mantonetti.
Okay.
Major General.
Did you have much to do with him? Did you know much about him?
Well,
or?
Later I did. I was, as a result of probably an accident. My brother had been sent to the regiment before me. He was a licensed attorney. I'd finished my first year of law school. When it came time to appoint counsel for the special court in our regiment, I'm sure, just as well as anything, that they mixed our names up, and I was appointed instead of him. And of course, tried to do the best I could, and I was reappointed, and just before we were getting ready to go overseas, I was appointed as defense counsel on the general court to defend 3 accused, and of course I got more experience. But when we got to North Africa, I was appointed as prosecution counsel on the general court, and as a result I had contact with General Eddy through that. But he was a very, very thorough individual, and not the boisterous kind, but you learn to respect him.
Yeah, the historians who have written about the war have got good things to say about Eddy generally that I've read. After you got ashore and after things got settled down, did you stay in the area for a while, or did you move east?
No, we stayed. As a matter of fact, they moved several of us into a hotel, the Hotel Marhaba. It's an Arabic name, I think. But anyway, we were there until we started a foot march from Safi to Port Leoti, 155 miles.
It's a long walk.
Yes. Up to that time, that was the longest foot march that any American soldier had ever been called upon to endure. We started, well, I don't remember the date, but anyway, we, Casablanca, and were reviewed by General
Friedendall by any chance? Or?
No, I'm thinking of the French admiral and the French general.
Oh.
But I can't, right offhand I can't remember the name. But anyway, we arrived at Port Leote about as I remember, about the 22nd day of December. And were bivouacked in the cork forest there in training for the Tunisian campaign. And
how were conditions in the cork forest?
well, we were in pup tents, and it was kind of do the best you can.
It's cold?
No. It we didn't have any real cold weather there. In fact, until we left to go toward Tunisia, we didn't have any serious problem with the weather. But I remember, let's see, I don't remember the name of this little town right now, but anyway, as we passed through one town, there were oranges ripe on the trees in the city streets, and just above the city was a snow-capped mountain. Quite a contrast.
Mm-hmm. Did you have much contact with the local people?
Limited, as far as I was concerned. I didn't speak French or Arabic, and as a result, I didn't attempt to have much contact with them.
So you stayed pretty much within your own group. The court that you were appointed to, was that regimental or divisional?
General.
It was divisional.
It was division, yes.
Oh, okay. Once you finished the training for the Tunisia campaign, then what happened?
Well, then we got aboard our transportation and headed toward the front.
Mm-hmm.
And one of our number, Bill Luttrell, was captured at the Faid Pass.
I did an extended interview with Bill, and it was quite an experience for him.
But eventually we arrived at the front, and were in immediate contact with the Germans at a location known as El Guitar.
Yes.
And I can remember vividly some experiences there. I remember one afternoon, a German Ju-88 came over, and he was low enough that if I had known who he was, I could almost have identified him. And he machine gunned the area that I was in. I hit for a foxhole, and two of us got there at the same time. But after he had gone, I located where a bullet hole had gone into the sand about that far from my head.
6-8 inches from...
Yes. So that was not one of the most pleasant experiences.
No. Did you have quite a bit of trouble with the German Air Force there?
Well, the Germans had complete dominance of the air at that time. Mm-hmm. We hardly had enough air cover to even speak of.
So if you looked up and a plane was coming over, it probably wasn't one of ours.
We reasonably sure it wasn't ours.
That must have been scary business, because they could come up in a real hurry.
Oh yes. They were over frequently during that particular operation. And I remember one experience that I'll always remember. General Patton came up to our headquarters, and I just happened to be close to where the regimental headquarters was at the time. And with his pearl handle pistols, he jumped out of his car, and you know, he had two pearl handle pistols. He went up to the regimental commander, who's still the same one, Colonel Randall, and he said, "Colonel, order your men forward." By that time, we'd been in an attempt to dislodge the Germans for a week, maybe 10 days. But the Germans were so dug in that it was next to impossible. Colonel Randall looked at him and he said, "Hell, General, I've been ordering my men forward. Unless you can give me some heavy artillery, heavy tanks to help us get through, I'm not going to order my men forward anymore." General Patton turned, walked back and got in his jeep and headed back to the rear.
You got a gutsy colonel.
Well, General Patton thought enough of his military ability and what had been shown up through the campaign where we captured Bizerti that he recommended him for a star.
Okay.
And he was promoted and was sent to the Pacific, to the 77th Division as the infantry brigadier.
So this was by the end of the campaign?
At the end of the campaign,
Yeah.
in Tunisia.
By this time, I imagine you'd gotten to know the people you were working with and fighting with pretty well.
Oh yes, yes. I saw many of them brought back as casualties.
Yeah, the 9th Infantry did some heavy work there.
Yes, we did. And there were many close calls.
Did you remain in headquarters company, or did you?
I remained in headquarters company until the campaign in Sicily was over.
Oh, Before we jump to that, do you remember the feelings that you had towards the end of the campaign, where you knew it was going to be okay in North Africa, and
Yes.
what were your feelings?
Well, at one time I had an opportunity to be with the British forces as we were going up the Sajanane Valley, and I developed a great respect for them.
That would have been on the left flank of the
Yes.
American.
Yes.
Do you happen to remember what unit it was?
The British?
Yeah.
No, don't have any idea.
I didn't think
I may have put it down in my little notebook.
You kept a notebook?
Well, yes. Of course, I kept it in code
Mm-hmm.
so that nobody really could understand it but me. But yes, I
Did you
kept
keep it all the way through the war?
pretty much. And I forgot to bring it.
I would certainly like to see it sometime. So, did you? You knew you were up against the Germans and Rommel.
Oh yes, yes.
What kind of impression did you have, both of the Germans and of Rommel?
Well, I learned to respect him because he was a wily battle commander. The Germans, of course, we captured quite a number of Germans, particularly in the latter part. We captured many Germans. Incidentally, on the first push that we made at El Guitar, the Germans let the 2nd Battalion go through a trap. And they didn't close the trap until E Company, I believe it was, had been completely captured. The battalion commander, his staff, were all permitted to go through. And of course, we didn't know for sure what had happened to them until after the war was over. Except for one soldier who was an aid man, at as the campaign was over in Tunisia, he had conceived the idea that if he could make it appear like he was suffering from diarrhea, that he wouldn't be evacuated. And we liberated him after the campaign in Tunisia was over, so that he told us what had happened, at least insofar as the capture was concerned, and told us how he had feigned illness over a period of days while others were being evacuated. They didn't evacuate him, and he was still on land when we overtook the German forces at Bizerte.
How were they? Do you remember how they were treated by the Germans as prisoners? Did he have anything to say about that?
Well, he indicated that they didn't mistreat him, and that he was able to eat regularly.
You then stayed in North Africa after that campaign was concluded?
We, after that, we were moved to the edge of the desert, just southeast of Sidi Bel Abbes. And we're in intensive training in anticipation of the next move. And I remember one morning, as we were getting ready to pack up to leave, I was rolling up my bedding, and an adder slithered out from under my bedroll.
That would have ended your war in a hurry.
It could have, but fortunately I saw him about the same time he saw me. But then we marched. Let's see, the little town that we were next to was Magenta. But we marched from there to Oran. Mm-hmm. And I remember the temperature was 123 degrees in the shade that day. And there wasn't much shade. And the medical ambulances were going back and forth up and down the column, picking up those that were falling out.
That's a hard walk.
Most of the way I got to ride, fortunately. But we then went to Oran and were there until we got ready to go to Sicily. Mm-hmm. And I remember August the 1st was Division Organization Day. And we were not in the landing at Sicily, but we pulled into the harbor of Palermo on the 31st of July. And of course we didn't know when we were going ashore. And I remember Lindsey Nelson was on the same ship that I was, and he said, well, this will be the first time we haven't had any fireworks in celebration for Division Organization Day. About 3 o'clock the next morning, the Germans came over and dive bombed the harbor. And of course anti-aircraft was going up, and I just happened to see Lindsay out on deck. I said, you would say we weren't going to have any fireworks for Division Organization Day. Here we got plenty.
Mm-hmm. More than you wanted.
Oh my, yes. Well, as a matter of fact, the Germans hit a tanker that was anchored, ready to offload fuel, mm-hmm. and of course it burned for hours after that.
You were on a transport? Or?
Yes, transport.
And you went ashore shortly thereafter?
We went ashore the next day, yes.
And then you made it sort of along the coast towards Messina there?
Yes. Or? Well, no, we went the other way.
Oh. Uh-huh.
Cefalù, I think, was where we finally ended up. Mm-hmm. And we were there from the end of the campaign. Well, actually, we were alerted to go to Anzio after the campaign in Sicily. And fortunately, the tide of battle turned at Anzio, and we were pulled off of alert. And on November the 10th, I guess it was, we were loaded on transports and headed to England.
You didn't think you were out of the war, though?
Oh no, we knew the war wasn't over. We landed at Gourock, Scotland, on Thanksgiving Day.
What was your position then? You're lieutenant, captain?
I was first lieutenant.
First lieutenant.
And as after the campaign in Sicily was over, the regimental executive officer called me, and he said, there's an opening for S2 in the 2nd Battalion. He said it would put you in line to be a lieutenant colonel. And he said, I would like for you to consider taking that position. While I was thinking about it, within 30 minutes, the staff judge advocate at division headquarters called.
Coincidentally, just that you got the two calls
And,
within
yes,
a half an hour of each other.
and said that the table of organization for the division staff judge advocate's office was being changed to provide for a captaincy as assistants to the staff judge advocate. And he
Was wondering if you...
wanted me to take the position. My hero blood got awful thin.
It would with me.
And within 24 hours, I was on my way to division headquarters.
Going to staff rather than to the 2nd Battalion.
Yes. And during the period that we were in Sicily, after the campaign was over, I handled the prosecution of 59 cases before the general court.
What kinds of cases did you deal with?
All kinds. Rape, murder, desertion. We had one West Point officer prosecuted for fraudulently taking money from his battery troops.
West Pointers aren't supposed to do that.
Well, I understand that.
Well, nobody's supposed to do that.
But on that court, there were 4 Eagle colonels. The artillery assistant was a colonel, and the 3 battalion commanders, the 3 regimental commanders, were members of that general court. And so that is a rather high-powered court. But this particular West Point officer, well, it was while we were in North Africa, the value of the French franc was changed so that you got an additional 50% in the exchange. He had taken up the money from his battery men and took it to exchange, and when he got the new money, he just gave them back the value that they had given him without the increase. And so when some of them started complaining to the battery commander, well, they investigated and
skimming 50%
Yes,
off the top.
yes. And as a result, he was prosecuted and sentenced to be dishonorably separated from service. And I remember the law officer of the General Court was Major Otto Kerner, who was later federal judge in Illinois.
I know the name. Do you think that any comments on the sort of quality of justice in the General Court?
Well, the general feeling was that if you're guilty, you're going to have a rough time before the General Court. If you're not guilty, they'll acquit you.
That's fair enough.
I remember I had an experience. I was asked to defend a corporal who was charged with assault of a superior officer. I was asked by his company commander, who was commander of Company A, that had been side by side with old Company B and of course I had to get permission from the division commander to do it. But it had happened on the beach back at Oran before we had gone to Sicily. And as it so happened, it was on the enlisted man's beach. The officer's beach was here and the enlisted man's beach was here. And a second lieutenant quartermaster laundry officer, for some reason, I don't know, he was a little officious, but anyway, he saw this corporal, and the corporal had a drink or two, and he spilled a bottle of wine there, and the second lieutenant thought that he was going to get him straightened out, and he followed him into the dressing room. Now the second lieutenant had on just swimming trunks, didn't have any
bars on.
Didn't have any indication. And when he followed the corporal in, the corporal was in the process of getting dressed, and he started ordering the corporal around. And the corporal, having been a combat soldier and having been through the rigors of the Tennessean campaign, didn't take kindly toward being ordered around, and he asked him to show his insignia of rank. And the second lieutenant, yep, back at him, and he'd have to take his word for it. Well, enough exchange took place that the corporal, by the time he got dressed, decided, well, who is this young whippersnapper? And he followed him out on the beach and asked him again if he's going to order him around. He wanted to see some evidence of his authority. And the second lieutenant yapped back at him. Hit him right on the button. And there was a major just across the line that happened to have his shirt with his insignia on it. And the major picked up his shirt and walked over, and he said, "Corporal, I'm Major so-and-so. Here's my insignia." He snapped to attention and saluted, and the charges resulted from that incident. And so I got to defend the corporal. And I used the argument of reasonableness and got an acquittal.
Good. Sounds fair.
General Patton, whose command this second lieutenant was in, when he got the report that the man had been acquitted, called up and raised the hell. Who ever heard of acquitting a man striking a superior officer? Well, anyway, he didn't get very far with his complaint. But I later was among those that was present at the time that General Patton supposedly apologized for having slapped the soldier in the hospital. And we didn't know for the purpose for which we were there. All we knew was General Patton wanted to address the troops. And we, en masse, our division, the first.
The whole division was there?
Well, the whole division, first division, I've forgotten. Anyway, it was a huge assembly. And I didn't realize until later that General Patton had apologized to us. You got it turned on?
Yeah.
Of course, he was the most profane man I ever heard in my life.
I've heard that.
But this is the nearest to an apology that I heard. I didn't realize it was until later. He said, I may be a son of a bitch, but there are others. I didn't realize until I read the Stars and Stripes later that he had apologized to us. But anyway, when we arrived in England, we were met by a Scottish bagpipe band.
Did you ever heard bagpipes before?
I'd heard one, not an entire band. But we got on board the train and headed south. We didn't know where we were going, of course. But we arrived early the next morning at the city of Winchester in southern England.
Famous old city.
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, the Winchester Cathedral is noted in song.
Yes.
That's where the inscription on the soldier's tombstone, here lies the body of the Hampshire Grenadier who died from drinking cold small beer. I don't remember the rest of it, but anyway, that's. But we were there from November until the invasion of France. And
Pretty intensive training, or had
well,
you guys were veterans by now?
oh yes, but since I was transferred to the division headquarters, my training was involved in courts-martial, processing papers and things of that kind. I didn't have to carry a rifle anymore, or didn't have to carry a pistol either. But we did have quite a number of courts-martial that had backed up during the combat that period.
Was desertion a problem? You said you had some deserters.
Yes, yes, it was.
Understandable, I think. I
Oh,
think.
yes. Well, you know, I guess you can just take so much of being shot at.
Yeah, I saw a figure a while ago that said of all the casualties suffered by American forces in the Second World War, about 20% were psychiatric casualties. 1 in 5 would just simply break down and not be able to handle it anymore.
My recollection is our division total casualty was 45,000. Some were multiple. As a matter of fact, we had one lieutenant colonel who was officially wounded 13 times. Fortunately, all of them were relatively minor.
It's a lucky man.
And his name, we didn't use his name. His name was Quentin Hardage. We called him Hardtack.
Sounds appropriate.
But our division had the most decorated soldier in World War II, Matt Irvin. He, I've got his book, but didn't bring it with me. He was wounded, I think, either 6 or 7 times, but the last time he got a bullet through his throat, right through the vocal cords. And fortunately, an aid man was close, put his fingers in the bullet hole until a medical officer could come and render more extensive first aid. He was evacuated back to, this was in France. He was evacuated back to England and was in months of rehabilitation. He did regain partial use of his vocal cords, not complete, but enough so that he can communicate.
When did you, you knew from being in England that you were going to be part of the invasion?
Oh yes, it was just a matter of when.
When did you find out when? Do you remember?
Oh yes, we found out as we were being transported to Southampton that it was just a matter of any day now. And we were not in the D-Day. We went in D4 on Utah Beach, and saw the evidence of the invasion. Very shortly, we were in some of the hedgerow area where you see where the gliders had come in and wings had been knocked off, and that was not the most successful part of the operation.
The 9th Infantry went ashore there, and as I remember, the resistance was not, at least at first, as difficult as they had feared.
That's right. The Germans thought we were going in at Calais, I think,
Yeah.
and had moved more of their forces up there in anticipation. I think we had given them some indication that that's where we were going, and they took the feint.
That hedgerow country that you're talking about, that's good defensive country.
Well, I remember we had we were on one side of the hedgerow and the Germans were on the other at one place, and we got a couple of replacements that had been sent up, and they reported to the sergeant in charge of the squad, and he was trying to learn how well prepared they were, and he said, "Now, do you all know how to use a hand grenade?" "Oh yes, yes." He said, "Well, now the Germans are just on the other side of this hedgerow." He said, "You sure you know how to use a hand grenade?" "Oh yes." He said, "Well, now you take it and you pull the pin and you count 2 and you throw it over." "Oh yes, yes." He said, "Okay, let's see how you do it." One of them took the hand grenade, he pulled the pin and threw it over. Came right back. "Comrade, comrade!" The Germans were ready to surrender. He said, "Now, damn it, I told you, you're supposed to count 2 before you throw it. Now we got 2 darn German prisoners. What in the hell are we going to do with them?"
There were, some of the German troops would do that. In general, the assumption I've had is that the German resistance was pretty fierce.
Oh yes, it was. It was. I remember one day the German artillery opened up on where we were, just before we approached St. Lo. We were at a crossroads and went in this building, and the German artillery opened up on it. And we had gotten to the point that when we heard the German gun go off, we knew whether the shell was coming close or not. And they were coming close. And we moved into the part of the building as far away from the German artillery as we could get. And I'd hear the gun, and I'd say, "Here comes another one." Finally, one of the ones that was there said, "Well, damn it, you don't have to keep reminding us, do you?"
Did you get the impression that, I was thinking about this before in North Africa and Sicily too, what impression did you have of their equipment,
The German
broadly defined, yeah, as opposed to ours?
Well, their tanks and their 88 artillery pieces were such that we had a great deal of respect for them. And they were fighters.
When you were in Saint-Lô, was that right after at the time the battle took place, or shortly after?
Well,
or?
we were there before it actually took place. And I remember the morning the bombers came over in wave after wave. And you could hear the bombs dropping out there. And you may remember that General McNair was killed in that operation.
Some of the bombs fell short.
Well, of course, after a while, see, there were two roads, the St. Lô Perrier Road, and the other one, I don't remember the name of it. But anyway, the second road was supposed to be the bomb line. But after a while, the smoke and everything from the bombs was so heavy that the bombers couldn't see the road specifically. And as a result, it created some problems. And I remember, I don't remember which part, this was a dive bomber. One of our planes had gone over and a bomb had stuck on the wing and didn't release. But as he came back, it released, and I could see it. It hit in the 15th Engineer Battalion dynamite truck. And I've forgotten how many men were killed, but anyway, of course, there's another one of those.
Yeah, it happens.
It happens.
Yeah, unfortunately it does.
Yeah.
People thought somehow that Vietnam was the only place where friendly fire did us damage, but that's just not true. Saint-Lô was pretty badly beaten up.
Oh, yes.
I've seen some pictures of that area.
Well, most of the area in that vicinity was pretty well damaged.
Yeah, fighting for a city or a town is. Once the division got out of the hedgerows, then
We were able to move. But I remember my old regiment was in direct contact or pursuit of the Germans for 143 days on end. That was a lot of togetherness.
yeah. Did you get to Paris?
Oh yes, but just barely. We just kind of passed through the outskirts on the run.
Oh,
I didn't get stopped.
I've heard that complaint from quite a number of soldiers.
Well, I didn't have any feeling that I was going to be greatly deprived if I didn't get to Paris. I was more concerned about getting it over than I was getting to Paris.
How did the French react to the Americans coming?
Oh, they were open arms. They were
right from the beginning, even in Normandy.
Yes. My contact with the French was very pleasant. My contact with the Belgians later was also. We felt that the Belgians were tops.
What sort of contact did you have with the Belgians?
Well, we had some contact with some who had been resistance fighters underground, and got to talk with them about some of their experiences. One fellow had been captured by the Germans about 3 different times and always escaped. And he was a walking arsenal. He had German Lugers, and I've forgotten several different kinds of German weapons.
Let's see, the 9th then was, were you in First Army or?
The First Army.
First Army,
Yeah.
Courtney Hodges.
Courtney Hodges.
Where, let's see, I'm trying to remember, did the 9th get involved in the Hurtgen Forest operation?
Yes.
That was
Yes.
that was what I thought.
In fact, I came awful close to being a casualty. I had developed a problem with my neck, and the medical officers couldn't decide what my problem was, so they sent me down to Malmedy to the general hospital down there to see if they could decide what the problem was. And 3 or 4 different doctors, they took x-rays and talked to me, asked me a lot of, sound like silly questions to me, but eventually one of them came in, he said, well, we decided what your problem is. And I listened. He said, you need a little square object, about a white square object about so big. And I didn't understand what he's talking about. He says, you don't sleep on a pillow, do you? He said, your neck has been in a little bit of a strain as a result. I had one of these safari cots that sits up about so high, and so he said, you need to put something under your head to give you a little support. Well, it was about 1:30, maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I headed back to my headquarters. That night, the Germans broke through. In the battle.
Yeah, December of '44. Then.
Yes, sir. And so that is how close I came to being there when the Germans came through.
That would have been the wrong place to be.
Yes, yes. But then our division formed the northern hinge of the resistance to the German penetration.
You walled that off.
Yes. They never moved us.
Took heavy casualties.
Oh, yes, yes.
For a while, the American forces came under British control, under Montgomery's command, for a while anyway. In fact, I think he kept command of 9th Army.
Yes, yes.
To the north of it.
As General Devers.
What did you think of Montgomery? Anything? I mean, did you have any impression of?
Well, of course, we followed Montgomery's operations in North Africa, and we had a great deal of respect for him. He obviously made a lot of difference in the outcome in North Africa. And we were glad for him to come on the southern part in Tunisia when we had the Germans, and they were able to help squeeze them into the end of it.
After I imagine when the Battle of the Bulge began, there was quite a bit of excitement at division headquarters.
Yes, yes. And the snow was on the ground. Where my recollection is we had snow on the ground from November until the last of March. And there were a lot of frostbitten feet.
Did the division headquarters, was it a situation where they were putting together units from trying to get people into the combat line from headquarters units, and did the 9th pretty much fight with the regiments in place?
We fought with the regiments in place.
After that was over, then you approached the Rhine by March of
And yes, I remember on Easter Sunday, we had church services in a little German church on the banks of the Rhine.
What town do you remember? Or
Remagen.
oh, at Remagen.
Oh yes. My old combat regiment was the first regiment across the Rhine River. I wasn't a part of it.
But yeah, so you were part of that bridgehead then on the
Yes.
other side of Remagen. What was your feeling about being in Germany and dealing with German civilians rather than Belgian or French?
Well, of course, the Germans kept a distance from us. They didn't do much intermingling with the American troops.
Mm-hmm. You knew by March of '45 that it was pretty well over.
Yes. We knew it was just a matter of time.
Mm-hmm. But bad things could still happen.
Oh, my yes. Yes, I remember going by where the medical officers were operating on some casualties, and some of it was pretty gruesome.
Yeah, explosives can do real bad things. Where did the division end up at the end of the war?
We met the Russians at the Elbe River at a little town known as Kothen, Koethen, I believe is the way you spell it. And we got to see the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
And
What did they look like to you? What?
well, they were just soldiers. Of course, I couldn't speak any Russian.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't speak any English, so we didn't communicate. But we were glad it was over.
Yeah, it's apparent from what you've been saying that this remains an emotional experience for you. It's not easy to talk about. Primarily because of friends that you lost.
Many.
One of the things that has struck me, and I've done military history for a long time now, and be it the War for Independence or the Civil War or World War II, is that with the losses, you not only have lost the person, you've lost that entire future and whatever that person might have done. And so it's the casualty, but it's the whole future experience that is no longer, and it's stopped. It's cut off there. And the world is different because of the people who didn't make it.
I was I was in the Army of Occupation, and Ingolstadt was where we were located, just north of Munich. When I received word that my brother had been killed. And
How did that happen? What?
he was in the Pacific, division general.
With Randall's.
Randall had gone to. And a Japanese shell hit right in front of him. And when I got the message, his wife was an Army nurse somewhere in England. The word came to my father, since it was uncertain as to where she would be. And the message. Asked if I could go tell her. I never had seen her.
That was a hard request.
All I knew was the hospital unit that she was with, somewhere in England. I knew the APO number. And I got leave and flew from Nuremberg to London on a military transport. Contacted the American headquarters to find out where she was. And I got a train and went. I called her from London to tell her I was in England. And waited until I got there. Had no idea what her reaction.
You had not met her. You
Hadn't met her.
know her.
As a matter of fact, I made a foolish. They were married after I was already in North Africa, and I was young and brash, and I didn't even know he was getting ready to get married. And I got this letter while we were at Port Leote that they were married, and so forth. And foolish as I was, I wrote and suggested that I'd been able to keep him safe until I got overseas. And as soon as I got overseas, he got caught.
Got caught.
I didn't know until later that she resented it.
That's too bad. Well, it's the kind of thing that a brother would say.
Yeah, but
Was she a Knoxville girl? Or?
no, she was. Let's see. No, he met her at Fort Jackson,
Oh.
where she was an Army nurse, and I'm not even sure where she was from. Virginia, I think. But in any event, that was one of the most difficult things I ever did.
I'm sure. This was a younger brother or older?
Older. He had been born at Greenville, South Carolina, while my father was in training to go to World War I.
Hmm. So for you, the war meant the loss of both friends and family.
Yes. But then, after I got back to my unit, I made application to be returned to the States. So when the Japs were bombed at Nagasaki and Hiroshima,
Yeah, Hiroshima.
I was on my way by train to return to the States. After the second bomb, we arrived at Marseille, France, and the Japs had surrendered. And we had a choice of coming back by Liberty ship or wait until the transports came back from the Pacific to come back home. I had been on enough of those Liberty ships that I wasn't enthralled by that prospect. So I told him I'd just soon wait until the transports got back. So I was at Marseille, I guess, 10 days. It was a difficult life. All we had to do was go down to the beach and go swimming and go to the movies and things of that nature. And I remember I'd gone to the movie one late afternoon. They flashed on the screen, all those and such group report to headquarters, your transportation is available. So we headed, I forgot the movie, and we flew from Marseille to Casablanca. Got there about noon the next day, and were there until late the next day. Flew from there to Dakar. Now wait a minute. That's right, Dakar. Then from there, the next day, we had breakfast at Dakar. Flew to Natal, Brazil, and were there until about 10 o'clock that night. And they called us. We got on board the plane. And early the next morning, as the sunrise was coming, the sun was coming up, we flew across the Amazon River at its widest point. And it was as far as you could see. As I remember, they said it's 100 miles from shore to shore. We flew to to Balaam Field in the northern part of Brazil. Then from there to British Guiana, from there to Puerto Rico. And that night, as we flew into Miami, there was one of the most beautiful sights. The first time we'd seen the lights of a big city since we left the States.
Right. Wartime conditions, you wouldn't have seen them.
Oh no, we wouldn't have been on.
Let me take you back to Germany for just a little bit. When you were in Munich or near Munich, did you go to Dachau?
Oh yes, yeah. Incidentally, our division liberated the Nordhausen concentration camp.
Did you see that as the division went through?
Yes. Yes. I have some pictures I haven't even shown my wife.
That must have been really difficult.
But they took us on a tour of the Dachau concentration camp, and that's one thing I'll always remember.
What do you remember most about it?
Well, the odor mainly, and to see those ovens where they cremated the bodies.
I was at Dachau 2 years ago, and they keep it as a memorial, and they have a museum there. But it's so pristine, it's so clean and neat.
Oh yes.
That I had difficulty trying to
You can't
visualize what it was like,
No.
and decided I just couldn't.
No, you can't. It's well, I've been back. Let's see, 1950 was the American Bar Convention was being held in London, and I took my wife to see some of the places that I had been, and we went to Munich and went by the Dachau, but it was completely different then.
When you saw it first, and when you saw Nordhausen, were there still former prisoners in the area, or had they been?
Oh yes, we had just liberated them, and there were rows of human skeletons with a little skin. That's about all.
That's as bad as it gets, isn't it?
Oh yes. Yeah. Well, the ordinary person cannot conceive of that. For many people, they attempt to say that it didn't exist, but it did.
No answer to this, of course, but how do you think it happened? Why did...
Well, of course, Hitler mesmerized the people of Germany by his approach, and since they had been trampled at the end of World War I and brought into submission, many of them felt like, well, here's our opportunity to get even.
Yeah, I understand that. The problem I have is how it ended up where it did.
Well, I dare say many of the German people didn't even realize what was happening. Now that's my own feeling.
I've heard from some Ninth Division and other people that, and that's what Eisenhower said too, that if you ever had any doubt as to whether the war was worth fighting, that something like Nordhausen or Dachau or something would convince you that in fact it was. Although the price that we paid and that other people paid was terribly high,
Oh, yeah.
and you know that.
Yeah. At one time, the 3 battalion commanders of my old regiment were 23, 24, and 25-year-old lieutenant colonels. Combat promotions.
You, from August of 41, when did you get out? When did you get back to Miami?
I got back to Miami in August of 45.
45, almost exactly 4 years then.
I was overseas 34 months and 8 days and so many hours, I'm not sure. I got to Fort McClellan I've forgotten the date, 22nd day of August, as I remember, and was rushed through the line, and I was given a terminal leave, 45 days, to come back. No, wait a minute, that's not right. I was given a 30-day rest and recuperation due to come back for discharge. When I got back, I found that the fall term of law school was to begin on the 22nd day of September, and I wanted to be enrolled. So I didn't wait till my 30 days was up. I went back early and got my terminal leave discharge. And as a result of the fact that I hadn't taken any leave while I was overseas except to go report the death of my brother, I was on terminal leave until the 14th day of January, 1946, while I was in law school. I was getting paid during the fall quarter of law school.
Nothing wrong with that. Did you then get GI Bill benefits?
Yes. Yes. Of course, I didn't get them until my terminal leave was over.
Right. You were still single then?
Yes. Well, in anticipation of what might happen, I determined in my own mind that I wasn't going to leave a young widow back here. And I haven't regretted it.
Did you have somebody in mind at the time, or?
No, I wouldn't let myself. I never got serious with anybody. I'd date one, then the other, but anticipating the possibilities, I wouldn't let myself get serious.
I understand. There are quite a few people in law school on the GI Bill, veterans with you? Or?
Oh, practically all of them. When I came back in 1945, I'd say there were probably 2 or 3 that were not. Most of the rest of them were returning veterans.
Where did you live when you were in law school here?
You know where Trentville is? You know where Carter High School is?
Yes.
In that community.
Was this family place?
Yes.
Yeah.
My father owned a farm out there.
A lot had happened to you from August of 41 to August of 45.
I'd grown up.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure.
I was real serious about law school.
You have that feeling with most of the veterans that
Oh,
they
yes, yes.
I always ask this question towards the end of the interview. Is there anything particular that you want to be sure that I know? Either a story or an anecdote or...
I remember one afternoon at the Bachelor Officers' Quarters in Fort Bragg, the telephone rang, and Lindsey Nelson picked up the telephone, and he was always cutting up. And he said, "Murphy's Pool Room, Joe speaking." On the other end of the line, "This is Colonel Randall." "Excuse me, wrong number." Well, it's an experience that I wouldn't want to go through again, but having survived, I'm glad that I had the opportunity to represent my country. And when we were in England, I got acquainted with the family. That the man was one of the best known barristers in southern England. And I got acquainted with it at one of the dances that we had, and went with her while we were still in England. She was ready to get married, but I still wasn't. But she and her brother were the owners of the Savoy Hotel in London, and if I'd just been interested in getting married, I could have married pretty well.
Could have married a real future in England if you wanted to.
But I wasn't particularly interested in settling in England, and have no regrets. When I got back home, I started going with my wife, whom I had known. Actually, I'd known her since we were in the cradle roll together. We had lived in Newport before moving back to Knoxville, and our families had known each other in the church from the time my father went to Newport in 1913 to hang out his shingle. He practiced law in Newport until 1923, and I was born in Newport, and she was from Newport, and we got better acquainted after I got back from the war. But she wasn't ready to get married until I had finished law school, and she wasn't sure whether she wanted to take a chance with me or not, I think. But anyway.
I don't know, somebody who's been with the 9th Infantry Division for 4 years probably is pretty keep up with that.
But we've had a full life.
You mentioned your brother. You didn't. His name was
James Thurman.
James
Thurman.
Did you have other family, brothers, sisters?
Two sisters, younger than I. One of them lives in Orlando. Well, no, not Orlando. Sun City Center, Florida. And the other lives in Tullahoma, Tennessee.
Well, I thank you. I appreciate you taking time to talk.
Well,
Following is an interview with Mr. Earl Ailor, Ailor, conducted at his office, 606 Main Street, Knoxville, Tennessee. Interview conducted by Dr. Charles Johnson, Director of the Center for the Study of War and Society. Interview May 18th, 1993. Normally what I do is just start out by asking kind of when you joined the service and why you joined and where you're from. You're from Knoxville area originally?
Yes. I was ordered to Fort Bragg and reported in on the 6th day of August, 1941.
Oh, before the war. Before we got involved
yes.
in the war.
To the 47th Infantry of the 9th Infantry Division.
Okay. You were drafted, or you came in through the Guard?
No. In the spring of 1941, our professor of military science suggested to the senior military class in ROTC that we apply for our year's active duty, with the idea that we could get our year's active duty over with, be back about our civilian occupation, and on with it.
You were a student at UT then?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was in the senior class of the ROTC. Our entire senior class applied for our year's active duty. And we had barely graduated and gotten our commission as new second lieutenants before we had orders to report for duty.
Was your training in the ROTC here in engineers or infantry?
Infantry.
And so you got your orders to report in August of 41?
Well, so I reported on August the 6th, 1941.
What was your impression of Fort Bragg when you got there?
Well, it was a great big place. and of course, immediately while we were involved in training, I was a platoon leader of B Company of the 47th Infantry, and we immediately were in training as soon as I got there, and stayed in training. We were on the Carolina maneuvers in the fall of 1941, and then I was sent in January to Fort Benning for a concentrated course in rifle and heavy weapons for the infantry regiment.
Okay. What was your impression of the quality and of the enlisted men that you were dealing with there in your first command?
Well, it was initially a shock because the enlisted men in the platoon that I had were from New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And it took several weeks before we could really communicate. They were mostly, I'd say, the majority of the ones were Italian, and many of them spoke with a very noticeable accent, with a southern drawl, and it took us a while to be able to really communicate.
They were city kids mostly?
Mostly, yes.
But you got, within a few weeks...
Yes, we got so that we could understand each other.
What did they think about being there? Do you have any idea?
Well, some of them weren't too happy about it. Most of them were reconciled to the fact that we were building up our military strength, and that it might be that we would have to use it.
How did you feel? Did you think it was quite certain that we were going to be involved in a war, or was it still...
Well, in the back of my mind, I think I realized that the chances of our being involved in war were much better than 50-50 because of the developments of the German occupation the area that they moved into, and the threat that was obvious from what they had done.
So you went off for heavy weapons training. What kind of training was that? What were you doing then?
We were given special training in the latest rifle that the United States Army had, and the latest in the machine gun, and it's in their use and the need for us to understand how they operated, as well as how they could be taken apart and maintained.
So these were M1s, 30 caliber, 50 caliber machine guns?
Right.
Okay, anything bigger than that? Anti-tank weapons? Or?
Well, yes, we had some instruction in anti-tank artillery.
37 millimeter or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was September, October?
No.
Or this was...
That began the first, my recollection is it was about the 1st of February.
Oh, it was after we got into the war?
Yes.
Yeah.
1942.
Do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Oh, well do I remember. It was on Sunday afternoon. I was in the bachelor officers' quarters. I don't remember what I was doing. I was either listening to the radio or I was writing a letter home to my parents. And I heard down the hall someone who was excited. I couldn't understand what he said, so I went and opened the door and I said, "What was that you said?" I'll always remember. He said, "The Japs just bombed Pearl Harbor."
I think everybody who was alive then and was aware understood that things were going to be different from now on.
Yes. Within a matter of a few hours, our division was alerted. Our motorized equipment was put on the train, and we were told that we were probably going to Trinidad. Why, I never knew.
Trinidad?
Yes. Shortly thereafter, we were taken off of alert and were started in amphibious landing training.
Oh,
And
where did you do that training? On the North Carolina coast? Or?
no, some of it on one of the lakes there on the Fort Bragg Reservation.
Oh,
And then later on the coast down at Paris Island and on the Chesapeake Bay.
What were those landings like? What sort of landing craft or what kind of boats did you?
Of course, they were not anything like what we later had in the big landing craft, but they gave us some feel for what a landing on a hostile shore might be like.
Okay.
I remember at least twice we went to the Chesapeake Bay and had landing operations on the Chesapeake Bay. And I remember so well the mosquitoes were about as big as...
big as your thumb.
Yes. And they weren't very pleasant company.
These landing craft, were they motorized?
Oh yes,
yeah.
yes.
But they weren't the ones with the drop down
Not,
bows.
Not until later, no.
Yeah. Right. So you went through that training, and then you went to the other weapons training.
No. This was after I had gotten back from heavy weapons training.
Okay. So this would have been the summer of '42.
Summer of '42. And I remember we had a wise regimental commander. He'd been in World War I. And he didn't talk much. But when he did, you better listen. And I remember one in July, 1942. At the officers' meeting, he was always the last one to speak. We had weekly officers' meetings where we discussed what training we had had and what to anticipate and so forth. And I remember he got up after everyone else had been hurt, and he said, "Well, I guess everybody's afraid the war is going to be over before you get your moment of glory." He said, "Just take it from me, before it's all over, you'll get your bellies full of it."
Talking like somebody who'd been there.
And we remembered that, 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 remembered that,